Welcome to AI Rounds, where we explore the intersection of AI and healthcare. I'm Dr. Anil Jain, Chief Innovation Officer at Innovaccer, and I'm joined by Lisa Bari, CEO of Civitas Networks for Health, Brendan Keeler, Interoperability Lead at HTD Health, and Bobby Guelich, Co-founder and CEO of Elion Health. Together, we'll be unpacking the latest developments in health AI and their implications for providers, for patients, and the industry at large. Now, let's start with the recent ruling on the lawsuit between Real-Time Medical Systems and PointClickCare. And I believe this was an appellate case that maybe started back about more than a year ago. It's led to some major implications for how we might interpret how EHR vendors control access to data and whether it's legally permissible for AI agents, and we'll get to AI agents in a little bit, how they get to get user privileges to EHRs to complete tasks on behalf of providers. And let's start with Brendan. Can you give us an overview of the case and why it's so important? I know you've
Yeah,
been writing on this.
a few drops of ink spilled, I'll
Yeah.
say. Systems of record like EHRs have an unfair right to win. They are where the data is stored. They are the locus of workflow. And in many cases, they either by malice, ignorance, or chance misuse that, right? They are attempting to grow, and so they build more products to upsell their existing customers. And in some cases that is competitive with point solutions on market. And real-time medical systems is a point solution, and PointClickCare is an EHR, so-called nursing facility EHR. And as PointClickCare grew, they moved into the same space as real-time medical systems and started to compete. And in the process of doing so, are accused by real-time medical systems of blocking the method of access, in this case, RPA, screen scraping, which real-time medical systems has been doing for over a decade. The real-time medical systems is not new. They've been around. They've been providing this for a while. So January of 2024, real-time actually sued PointClickCare, a recently certified EHR, a certified technology developer, with information blocking as the primary mechanism. Even though that doesn't have the private right of action, they utilize Maryland state law in combination with the federal information blocking rule to do this lawsuit. They won the district case in the summer of 2024. This was appealed by PointClickCare, and then we saw the appellate ruling come back to actually confirm the district's interpretation that PointClickCare had committed information blocking. This was actually not contested by PointClickCare. They had said, yes, we did information blocking. However, these exceptions, the information blocking exceptions, mean that we can. What we did is legal. Both the district and the appellate court both said, no, those exceptions do not apply. And so what this shows is that a number of things. One, that the bar for information blocking as a point solution to prove that a certified technology vendor, it's actually quite low. That is a broad rule that applies pretty comprehensively. That if it feels like information blocking, it might be. But the bar for the exceptions, which the burden of proof is on the certified technology vendor, the defendant, is quite high. And so this is empowering or invigorating for point solutions that feel blocked by certified technology vendors or providers or health information networks, any of the information blocking actors defined under the Cures Act. And so it also resoundingly says that the right of private action, in this roundabout way, is possible, that you do not need to wait on the regulatory bodies, the ASTP and OIG, to investigate information blocking complaints. You actually, if you feel blocked and is so eminent and threatening to your business, that you can use the courts for better or worse. And so by and large, this is celebrated by point solutions. It's contested by EHRs, and the remainder of the case stands in front of us. But we can expect more private action. We can expect more information, more B2B information blocking complaints. And we can expect this AI agents, which run on data, to vigorously pursue RPA, direct connections, API connections, every sort of connection, knowing that they have this lever to pull, this leverage over previously impregnable fortresses that are systems of record. Anyway, a lot of talking, but that's the overview.
Well, Brendan, thank you. That's a great overview of what has transpired and over probably more than a year and a half now. And I think what I heard from you, both around the information blocking as well as a new form of interoperability that's going to promote competition, perhaps with some of the incumbents and some of the ways that I've locked it in. Now, Lisa, from your perspective, what does this mean for the folks that you speak to on a
Yeah.
regular basis? And I know you've got an opinion on this as well.
Yeah, so just from a constituency base, Civitas's members are the nation's state and community health information exchanges, quality improvement organizations, other data collaboratives, and similar organizations. And so obviously, information blocking complaints in either direction are really significant for that community broadly. I would also add something to what Brendan shared. I will say, I don't think that PointClickCare just rolls over and takes this, nor does the EHR Association, right? I don't think this is over, but it is, as Brendan noted, a really interesting direction and will definitely set a precedence for a lot more attempts in private action. I will also say there is some model legislation that's being shopped around the country that is trying to essentially also criminalize information blocking. And to some extent, this has happened, but there's more and more sort of movements in this area. I think advocates, for sort of a sensible application of information blocking are trying to work to evolve this language and sort of not have this be adopted broadly across the country, because that would be really, really troubling. But I think, again, it just kind of underscores Brendan's point that this is very much an active space, and we're likely to see more of this there. From my perspective, I don't understand how information blocking works without having those exceptions that were laid out pretty extensively in regulation. And in the previous administration, there was also an effort to continue to build on those exceptions as the landscape evolved, as you would expect, right? You would say, those exceptions are like, things like if you release the information, you could harm a person, or that you are in fact allowed to charge a reasonable fee for the release of data, right? And, you can argue about what that is. You're also allowed to, provide those data in a particular form and format that should also be acceptable. In the case of this lawsuit, allegedly PointClickCare, again, not a lawyer, not their lawyer, allegedly PointClickCare made the data available through a variety of means and a variety of options for real-time medical systems to access. And they chose to not do that, not do any development, not connect via any of the API options provided to them. And they want to just continue with their, RPA screen scraping. And that's what they insisted on. So I do think the exceptions are important. Big advocate of data flowing. I also think that we need to be a little realistic about this. And I would say, I don't think that PointClickCare rolls over on this one.
That's very interesting, Lisa. I think what I heard you talk a little bit about is the importance of the exceptions that have been built in through the legislation, as well as, and perhaps some of that is to help with protecting intellectual property, or at least that's the intent, perhaps. Bobby, now from your point of view, from the application developer perspective, based on what Brendan has shared and what Lisa was commenting on, any thoughts on what this all means?
Yeah, I mean, I think big picture in theory, this is great for the app developers, right? They should, for the first time, if this plays out, should be able to do anything in an EHR, that the EHR themselves could do if they have support from the provider organization that they're working with, which, apps for decades have complained about access issues. And so I think this is, a pretty big shift if upheld. It also creates bigger stakes. They can't, I think as Brendan's pointed out in some of his posts, they can't kind of lean on, oh, we don't have access to the information anymore. That's why we can't fully deliver here. And also just, I think, raises some interesting questions from a compliance perspective for the EHRs and how they comply with having to share this information, right? Like what, and I'm sure Brendan and Lisa know more about this than I do, but what is the extent of the information that they have to provide, and is what's available via, the APIs and the UIs kind of sufficient there? So overall, I mean, I think it's pretty significant. And then again, as Brendan's noted, from an agentic perspective, with those capabilities advancing so quickly, I think there's some pretty massive implications for developers around their ability to both read from and write to these systems of record.
I have one.
That's very helpful.
I have one other thought, if you'll permit me, is two interesting facts about this. One, there's only one other vertical or industry that has a parallel to this, to information blocking, and you will never, ever in a million years guess what it is. It is auto dealership management systems. In about 5 or 6 states, they have a rule because the two main incumbents, the systems of record, were preventing point solutions from accessing data, from getting data to move from system to system. And so Arizona, a number of states, passed the equivalent of information blocking for auto dealership management systems, which I think is just a fascinating thread to pull, because I don't know what other parallels there are between the healthcare and that. The other interesting thing is this is massively consolidative for the EHR industry. The burden of this legislation and regulation is a regulatory burden, and regulatory burden that cuts cleanly across a category. The people that feel it most are the smallest, not the largest organizations. And so this is a force that will unfortunately consolidate the EHR market, while at the same time opening up dramatic pathways for point solutions and disruptive point solutions to do cool things. And so I think that's kind of something that people miss. They say, wow, like this means like the fall of Epic, the fall of Athena, the fall of ClinicalWorks or whatever. Quite the opposite. It is the long tail that is culled by this sort of prerogative, because it is a burden that one lawsuit could cripple or put out of business.
And the long tail that was created by regulation, by meaningful use. So, maybe it's a full circle moment for all of us.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll definitely keep an eye on this for sure. I think it's going to be interesting to see whether it's the first chapter, the first salvo, or whether it's something that's going to persist as a game changer for those application developers. So, Brendan, speaking of keeping an eye on different legal things, and again, knowing that none of us are lawyers on this call, and none of us can be in this industry without having some amateur opinions about the law, however. So the Epic and Particle Health dispute continues. And Particle had a recent setback where the U.S. District Court judge basically shut down Particle's questioning of the oral order where the motion to dismiss was being considered. What does this really mean for the case, Brendan, in terms of the long dispute that's been going on? How should we interpret this?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, we're not lawyers, but God, is it fun to refresh Pacer and pay a bunch of money and check these things out. Every court case has its ebbs and flows and important moments. Of course, when they submit their opening complaints and counter complaints is exciting. We're about to hit the most exciting part, which is, will this be dismissed? Particle is suing Epic for antitrust, not for information blocking. They're related, but the bar for antitrust is quite high compared to what we're seeing about with information blocking. And that is many people question, including myself, question, are the grounds for antitrust met? Will this case be dismissed before we proceed to the next phase, which is discovery? And so Particle argued that discovery should commence, that there was no order on the books, that discovery could not just commence and they could start to pull things from Epic, even as the dismissal was pending. And in the oral arguments or discussions, the judge had agreed with Epic that discovery should be stayed until the decision on the dismissal. The judge responded to the Particle pretty vehemently, pretty strong, and said, "Never in 45 years have I ever seen someone question an oral statement, oral decision in this way," which is a pretty shut the door on that line of argument. Which means we come to this critical moment of, will it be dismissed or not? And if it is not dismissed, they will do discovery. And if they do discovery, they're going to find some stuff out. It'll be really, really interesting. But there's a strong case for it to be dismissed. There's a strong case that the market dynamics or the market definitions are not correct, that there isn't a monopoly, that there isn't anti-competitive behavior, but we'll have to see.
Do you have any projections on what those things that might be found out if they went to discovery? Any ideas, any hints?
The beauty of discovery, you can just you can ask for all these conversations, you can get all this information, and they could find strong evidence of anti-competitive behavior potentially, right? That's why you do discovery. They could find things that aren't what they expected. So looking at the things they requested, it's very targeted in the lawyer sense of you can't just go say, give me everything, but it's pretty broad in the sense of the sheer number and category of things that they asked for in terms of communications and strategic documents and things like that.
Yeah, like
Sure.
every discussion that that Epic executives had about care quality as it related to any kind of enforcement or governance actions, and anything about the connections they had with Particle or similar companies or the companies that were working with Particle. I mean, they'll be asking for like every single conversation, every single official record, email, you name it. I mean, that's quite a lot.
I can imagine. Yeah, it seems like that would be first, it would be a very difficult thing to go through and try to interpret in terms of what people's intentions were. But that's very interesting. It's another case we'll need to keep an eye on in terms of where it's going to lead us. Um, Bobby, any thoughts on this?
Not my area of expertise, so nothing all that intelligent to add
So
beyond Brett and Elise's comments.
you're going to keep an eye on this just like the rest of us are, I suppose, and see where it leads.
Exactly. I mean, I think the whole payer platform market definition is like an interesting topic to dive into. Again, I think Brendan probably has deeper thoughts here, but I think that's the most interesting part of this for me is what truly is the market they're talking about a monopoly being had in, and what does that mean? So I'll be interested to see whether this is ultimately dismissed or not.
Yeah.
I'll opine on that a little bit on the payer
Sure.
platform piece, because I think, Particle's original argument here around the definition of payer platform and how they claimed that they were, first to this market in some way is laughable at best. I mean, appreciate the confidence and, like good for you guys, but there's been a lot of work in this area for many, many years from many different companies. And so that's why when I first saw this, I remember talking to Brendan about this months and months and months ago. We were like, is this going to go anywhere? This seems like a weird premise. And that seems to still be the premise that, they believe that they were this, breakout startup with this incredible, unique idea, and Epic came in and stole it from them. And I just don't know I don't think that's not my understanding of the facts at hand. And this is not me, necessarily like clapping for Epic's payer platform. I think there are lots and lots of different solutions in this area in many different ways. And so, I don't think that Epic owns the space either, but I also don't think that Particle invented it. That's my non-legal opinion. Again.
And I'll just jump, if you permit me to, I'll just jump on to say the key here is this is leveraging. This is saying Epic has a monopoly in a certain market. They leverage their market way to act anti-competitively in a different market to gain market share. And I think it is very dubious on both accounts of, do they have a monopoly in the EHR? Well, not by, if you look at the whole vertical market, certainly not, right? They're like 30% market share. If you look at acute, perhaps. If you look at certain regions, definitely. And so like the nuance of market definition is an art, not a science in antitrust, and changes like with these different tests and things. And antitrust has changed a lot over the past two administrations. So that it's hard to see which way the judge might break. Will the judge Buchwald be more of a Lena Khan interpretation or more of a traditionalist interpretation? But like those market definitions, both of the original market and the leveraged market, are super important. But I agree with Lisa. Like my first take was like, man, there's everybody and their best friends trying to sell clinical data and other products to payer provider data exchange in different facets. And so there are many that say I'm a payer platform. And so, yeah, like it's just in the emotional response I had based on just knowing the market was, this is laughable, or this isn't going to pass. But the law is the law is different, and the law is also, the interpretation of the law is changing such that I think it's a big swing, because the even if it's a 5% or 10% chance for Particle and their law firm, potential value is quite high. With triple damages and things like that. That they said, you know what, we're going to go swing for the fences. And so lower percentage chance, and perhaps they knew that, knowing that if you multiply that times expected value and get expected value, it could be still quite high.
Interesting. Again, we're going to need to keep an eye on this, because this will have implications for all those innovators out there who might have ideas and might be up against some of the large incumbents in terms of how it gets interpreted. But it will be interesting to see how this administration might be interpreting some of the sort of the anti-competitive behavior types of regulations. Shifting gears. So recently, I think it was last week, in San Francisco, Shaper Capital held their inaugural AI and Healthcare Summit. In fact, our CEO at Innovaccer actually was on a panel. It was a gathering of CEOs, investors, and regulators to cover everything that's going on in healthcare AI. Now, Bobby, you were in attendance. Can you share with us some of the takeaways from that event and what it might mean for for our group and for our listeners?
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, for those who aren't familiar, Shaper Capital, they're the family office of Travis May, who's the former co-founder and CEO of LiveRamp and DataVan. So tons of connections, was able to assemble a really cool and interesting group of folks. And I think a few, I'll say, interesting panels and discussions, maybe with a few takeaways from. So the keynote was from Sarah London, who's the CEO of Centene. I thought it was pretty good. I thought it was pretty, pragmatic, kind of in her thoughts. I mean, one, probably unsurprisingly for a conference like this, she was very bullish about the potential of AI, but noting that we're going to be holding AI to a higher standard than humans, and that you're already seeing this today. And so ultimately what that means is that AI adoption is going to move at the speed of trust. And so it's less of a technical story, pretty good for many of these incumbent organizations around adoption. It's, how quickly can we get our organization to trust it? So things like auditability, explainability, traceability become really important for for a lot of these vendors who are trying to sell into them. There was also a pretty interesting panel on the role of government as it relates to adoption, and you had some pretty candid views across the panelists. I think the positive spin was that with the current administration, there's more of a mandate for change, and that they are bringing in some good and experienced people, and so there's an opportunity to go on the offensive and really have the ability to have an impact and help shape some of the policy that's being developed. And honestly, an argument from a number of the folks who are on the stage that if they're not doing that, states are going to step into the void. And so you're going to wind up dealing with a set of patchwork regulations as opposed to something at the federal level. The negative, obviously, was that there was a lot of concerns amongst the panelists that the administration's taking more of an axe than a scalpel to some of these departments. And as a result, that they're truly cutting to the bone, and it's going to have major implications on the ability to get things done and make progress. There was also a pretty interesting panel with 3 former FDA commissioners. And a lot of the discussion focused around access to data. And particularly, they spent a lot of time on the importance of data from failed clinical trials, which I thought was pretty interesting. So today, this data is both kept at the FDA and then confidential amongst the organizations that ultimately submitted it. And they, at least these former FDA commissioners, had a strong desire to make this data public because there's so much richness in what they learned from these failed trials. And while the FDA can advise to some degree on what they've seen work and not work, the result is that a lot of other pharma companies and life sciences companies move forward with ideas that maybe there's already some pretty clear evidence around it not working. So I thought that was a pretty interesting conversation. I think broadly the general vibe wasn't all that different, frankly, than kind of what probably most people are sensing kind of out there, which was, we're largely moving beyond the kind of first initial adoption use cases, particularly AI scribes. But we are still largely focused on the easiest and least risky problems. So kind of the next wave of administrative use cases, whether it's rev cycle management or things like patient access and scheduling. So I think the general zeitgeist wasn't all that surprising, though there is, unsurprisingly, also more of a real shift towards hard ROI and wanting to see that from solutions, particularly given the cost of a lot of the solutions out there. So a few thoughts from the conference.
I have something to add on that. First of all, I'm really mad that I wasn't invited. I'm going to have to elbow my way in next time. But second of all, it sounds like a lot of the vibe of the DataVant conference or summit that they've had a couple of times, which is great as well. And that's not surprising because, of course, Travis May was involved in that before and probably spoke at the last one too. But, the big AI companies are specifically asking the federal government to pass a law to preempt state laws because they are of what you said, Bobby, in the part of the conversation, which is that they were expressing concern about conflicting state laws and there already are conflicting state laws, just to be clear, having to navigate that. So that's just kind of like, that will be a very interesting place to keep an eye on if you work in this space, right? There's a lot of stuff happening right now on that, whether the Trump administration will push for that and try and find some way to provide air cover for companies working in the space. It's not specific to healthcare, but it's specific to the application of AI in enterprise systems. And the other one is, of course, that this new Peterson Health Technology Institute report about the adoption of scribes, which, Bobby, I think you were an advisor on or had just a quick plug for it. It's really fantastic. And I know it complements some of the work that you've done in Elion for, reviewing the ambient AI scribes. But it's a really deep and thoughtful report about what we know today, right here in March 2025, about the actual adoption of these ambient scribes in health systems and what actually has already come out about the effect on everything from finances to physician burnout. And so just a really interesting point of context for that too.
Well, that's a great segue into our next topic around scribes and some of the recent articles. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit more on the study that you're referring to, the work that you and Bobby or others might have done that could help us get some clarity on what's really happening on the ground. But are you referring to the University of Pennsylvania study?
No, this is a recent Peterson Health Technology Institute report on the adoption of artificial intelligence in healthcare delivery systems, the early applications and impacts. And they use their task force. And I believe that Bobby was an advisor. So Bobby, you're probably best suited to tell us more about it.
Yeah, happy to. No, it was really cool. I mean, I do think it's the best report, at least that I'm aware of out there today on kind of the current state of things. But yeah, they gathered bunch of health systems who have been either trialing or doing enterprise rollouts of these solutions, a bunch of the leading developers of these AI scribing solutions, and a few other random folks like ourselves who have a little bit of a window into the space. And I wouldn't say actually the conclusions are drastically different than the UPenn one. I mean, I think most of what people were indicating was the tangible benefits are mostly more, I'll say, on the qualitative side of things today, reduced documentation burnout and feelings of burnout, some, improvements in patient experience, given the ability of clinicians to more fully engage in the visits, some improvement in note quality and completeness, and some measured reduction in after hours pajama time, which I actually thought was the biggest stat that I saw in the UPenn study as well. That kind of reduction from 50 to 35 minutes was pretty significant.
15 minutes. 15 minutes is nothing to sneeze at. It's a good amount of time.
On a daily basis. Yeah, for sure. And I think, maybe again, somewhat similar to that study, that where the evidence was more mixed to lacking was, time saved per note. I think a lot of folks are finding that they're still needing to, spend a decent amount of time reviewing them and editing them in a certain number of cases. I don't think anyone's consistently found an improvement in throughput as far as patients seen per day based on these solutions. And some of the other financial ROI, I think there just isn't a measurement on yet. So whether it's, reductions in turnover because of reduced burnout or improvements from a coding perspective because of the quality of documentation, I just don't think there's consistent enough measurement there. And actually that was one of the themes through the conversations as well, is like you just have a bunch of different metrics. People are looking at different things, measuring them in different ways. And so it really makes it hard to assess these things at scale still. So yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing the qualitative improvements. There's one CFO on the call, for example, who was very clear. I'm like, I'm okay with that at this stage in the game. Like if our clinicians are happier, I'm happier, but certainly there's plenty of CFOs out there as well who, these are expensive, particularly at enterprise scale. And I want to make sure, that we're seeing real measurable return from them. So yeah, it was definitely an interesting task force.
Doctors, honestly, I mean, when have you heard a medical doctor be excited about a health IT tool? Like, what can you think back to, like, a true, like, I am so excited about this piece of technology that I use in my job when I am like charting. I can't remember hearing this, I've experienced this in person, talking to doctors about, you know, their experience of using ambient scribes and the modern version of ambient scribes, and like overwhelmingly positive. I have not heard this in years and years and years.
And that is the problem here. So the problem here is that the value of scribes and copilots accrues to the user and not to the enterprise stakeholder. And we've said this before in a prior one, I've written about it. And over time, we're going to see, you know, less burnout, like happier physicians, things like that. But because it's accruing to the user, it's going to be lossy and accruing to the enterprise. And so after this year, next year, enterprise are going to go, well, wait a minute, I'm paying $500 and I am not seeing it. The 10x that's accruing to the user, I'm only getting 2x, or I'm only getting 1.5. I'm seeing the minimal ROI because there's this lossiness for the user tool, and they're going to shift into agents hard, because agents are 100x improvement that they're going to say, wait a minute, I can see the return because I'm spending and it's doing things. And there's a clear line of sight between the two.
Well, I think, Brendan, the other thing too, I would just very quickly say is I think that's why you see so many people focusing on revenue cycle as the extension of scribes, right? So yes, I think it drives agents net adoption, but like it's not a surprise people are pushing so hard into coding and, you know, the implications of that, because it's just so much more measurable, right?
And it's also,
that's actually more
100%. Like, that's exactly where I'm going, is like, the job to be done is not just pushing a note back in. It's not pushing in discrete note things. It's to do every single piece of documentation for that a doctor would have to type something in. And so you're going to see us get from the 15 minutes to much higher as those deeper integration points, one, get available through APIs or screen scraping or whatever, and scribes build them, but also just the convergence of the whole Copilot market as they start to do the one that was just doing the coding is now going to be doing the scribing, and the scribing is going to be doing, like, you're going to see them move to more of the platform of trying to do all the jobs to be done, because the actual job of copilots and scribes is to do all of it, is to take away every keystroke and then get the doctor to 10x. And still the enterprise will look down at it and say, why am I not seeing 10x? I'm only seeing 2x or 5x. I'm seeing much lower return than I was promised, which will cause that shift to agents because of the lossiness of a user getting time back and not using it 100% back toward redirecting all this time back towards productive work, taking a coffee break, using their pajama time. And so there'll be the lossiness and inefficiency of copilots that over time will cause more investment into agents and people, and the regulatory and social barriers to drop by virtue of organizations being greedy.
So on that note, right, I think I was having a conversation about administrative costs generally in the system as it relates to administrative or as it relates to the ROI of something like cross-sector data sharing last week at a conference in California. And we kind of all centered on the fact that, first of all, cross-sector data sharing is very, very, very much subject to the wrong pocket problem, whereby you're saving money in one place and reaping the benefits in another place, and you can't easily connect those two pieces. And we all agreed ultimately that the only way to show ROI in the way that would matter to the people paying for the care is in a really short time frame. As you probably know, payers and plans, they need to see that return really within that calendar year. And the only way you can get there, the only plausible way you can get there, is through dramatically cutting administrative costs that accrue in the form of literally paying someone's time, their hours of doing that work, that integration work, that EHR, the charting work, the billing work, whatever it is. And I think that still holds true for all of this. Everything we're talking about, what you're talking about, Brendan, the only way we are going to show the return or whatever it is by dramatically cutting that time that it takes, and that the dollars you pay people to do that administrative, data moving, data jockey work. Like there's just not another way to see those returns in that period of time. And so that's why, we see all these, sort of longer term ideas about how we're going to use AI in healthcare. And I come back to the only way that health systems and others who pay for care, payers, purchasers, whomever else are going to see that return and find that value over time is going to be those dramatic administrative savings. And one more thing I'll say, sort of from like a concerned equity standpoint, is that, even administrative applications of AI are not neutral. And there are decisions that are made, and there are things that happen when you create these administrative tools and apply these administrative tools that do have effects on people's care, right? Have effects on who gets care, when, where, why, how, whether things are raised in time. I think there's a very positive view of this, right? Like, I absolutely believe that if human beings, if medical doctors and nurses and medical assistants and everybody else are able to actually spend time with the patients, put more time into quote unquote bedside care, that will result in better outcomes. But it's not neutral, and it's really important. And the only place we see savings is in that actual dramatic reduction of human administrative time.
So let me see if I can.
Say,
go
can I
ahead.
Can I have one comment? Because
yes,
I'm curious if you'd agree, or maybe you're bundling this into what you're saying. But I do think there's the potential for revenue lift as well, right? And so, I think the argument of a lot of these scribes, CDI solutions, in the revenue cycle is, hey, you can have more comprehensive documentation, which allows you to, better capture diagnoses, more accuracy around the severity of patients, and greater revenue capture that you should have been capturing all along, right? At least in theory. So, we can debate
but
whether
that's
good
going to promote a major
backlash.
Yeah, that will promote a major backlash. The backlash is already coming, right? The incoming Trump administration has already been clear that they are going to be cutting back significantly on MA, that they're putting much more scrutiny towards risk adjustment in general, right? It's not neutral. Like, I agree that those individual providers probably should have been getting paid for, severity and things that they missed, but that's not a neutral thing. The overall system can't support more cost. And so what's going to happen is you'll see an even stronger backlash on the attempt to capture more revenue. And in the short term, like any provider system should probably be maximizing their revenue by coding accurately. Note I use the term accurately here, right? And capturing everything they are legally and legitimately allowed to capture. But that will result in a systematic backlash, and it already has, because some firms, some payers, some providers have gotten better and better at sort of maximizing their revenue. And now we're seeing the regulatory and the policy backlash. So like short term, yes, Bobby, but I think it will maybe just accelerate the pushback from the payers in general and the government in general.
Yeah, I'm totally aligned with you on that. I think it just, you're right. It just accelerates the arms race. Right.
That's right.
And then why you see, the winners in MA are the ones who are best at risk adjustment,
That's right.
It's that's where the competition is. And so this is only increased ammunition or weapons for that competition.
And we are in the early days of the agentic arms race, as you know. I'm sure that Dr. Jain will share with us his thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do want to go back to a point that I'm hearing both of you make, and actually all three of you have made over the conversations, is that some of the discussions around ROI can't be done in a piecemeal way. It can't be done at a point solution way. It needs to be done at a system level. And what one lever that might be moved might impact another lever down the road. And, hitting this up against some of the regulatory winds that are blowing in terms of what is going to be permissible and what is going to be, something as trivial as, if I spend less time with the patient, does that mean I can't bill the same level of service? So that's going to have an impact as well as the conversations around risk adjustment. And now you take it to another level, where instead of using a scribing agent or a co-pilot to support the clinicians, I would love to get your thoughts on this. When you start now replacing that with an agent, and I won't go as far as to say a primary care agent, because that's my field. And, whenever someone brings that up to me, I always say, well, does that mean that you have to take the USMLEs and you have to take the boards and you have to get licensed by the state that you're going to be practicing it as a primary care agent? But we are seeing this in nursing, and we'd love to get your perspectives, and we should come back to the ROI story after that, because I think the ROI story is a lot about human resources and human resource rationalization, but it's as much about what do we want the future healthcare workforce to look like, and where are we augmenting things? So I know we've discussed this previously, but we know that across the country, and in some localities in particular, nurses are pushing back on AI agents. We see this happening on a regular basis. And several companies have launched nursing agents that claim to automate a lot of tasks that traditionally have been done by registered nurses. And that's an important piece. These are credentialed registered nurses, such as calling patients to prepare for surgery, confirming information about their prescriptions. The National Nurses United, which is a union, recently said that the entire ecosystem is designed to automate, de-skill, and ultimately replace caregivers. And so we don't even have to go to physicians, but sticking with the nurses side, is that really the intention of all these companies launching agents? And I'll use the word agents with a capital A in this case. Or do agents have a less sinister role in the clinical ecosystem? And I know I'm being a little bit provocative in that question, because ultimately you just all explained to me that the ROI is really going to come from reducing human capital at some level. And here are these companies that are putting out nursing agents that are designed to do just that, and yet they're facing some backlash. So how do we reconcile sort of what we're hearing? And maybe Brendan, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Lisa and Bobby to sort of continue the story that they were just sharing with us.
You could replace almost every word of what you just said with a different role and union association when it comes to agents. Right. You could also do it for the manufacturing industry when when the Industrial Revolution happened. And so right. The fear, uncertainty, doubt of loss of job, McKinsey consultants are afraid of losing their job to deep research. My developers are afraid of losing their job to Claude agent and things like that. And so it is not unique in this paradigm versus Industrial Revolution, where it applied specifically to jobs. This is happening everywhere. We have unique regulatory and social barriers, and the regulatory ones will fall over time because corporations are greedy and they will follow their self-interest, which is the fundamental fact is scaling operational costs are linear, and scaling software has marginal costs that are logarithmic. And so you can make infinitely more money as an organization, which means that some subset of organizations, corporations, healthcare organizations will say, damn, we can provide a shitload more care if we pursue this path of agents, and they will find a way to do it, either by doing state regulation or limited pilots or whatever. It's going to happen. And so that is the reality of what we can do, and we can lean into it and say, we can stick our head in the sand and say it's not going to happen, we're afraid of it, we must preserve something that is fundamentally less efficient. Or we can say, let's go full bore for it and legalize it. That's not right. It's exactly what we're doing with other nascent technologies like drones. That is the right path here, where we're saying, hey, let's pilot this in somewhere in Texas and see how it works and make it work efficiently. And then we can scale it up with the rules and boundaries and guardrails that we need. That has to be the future we pursue, or we're making a huge mistake and we're going to be laggard against other countries, other jurisdictions. But the fundamental flexibility of humanity is to find new things to do, to fill the gaps, and to orchestrate with empathy. And our orchestration and our empathy means that there will be roles for everybody that will change dramatically over the coming decade. But the fear, this fear, omnipresent fear that everyone has that their jobs are going to evaporate, is such a lack of confidence in yourself and your capabilities. And so everybody that feels threatened should say, wait, how do I lean into all these technologies to do something that is even higher leverage tasks and use of my unique capabilities that, whether or not you believe in God, that are granted to you on this earth. And so why not view it with optimism?
Okay. So what I heard from you, Brendan, just to make sure I heard it correctly, is that corporations are greedy, that regulations will fall, that we should be leaning into it, and we need rules and regulations. So let's
just that title on the snippet.
Yeah.
He lives in Portland, so I feel like it's pretty to be expected.
Sure. But Lisa, he did say regulations will fall, but that rules and guidance is needed. Guardrail, I think, is the word he used. Brendan.
Yeah.
So tell me,
how do we
do that?
So I have a slightly different take. I mean, I agree with the trajectory that Brendan, lays out for us. I think that is a very likely trajectory, but I really believe strongly in humans providing care to other humans. And I absolutely think that we should push to get as much of the drudgery, as much of the really painful administrative work, handled through technology. But I think that that has to be designed and implemented in a way that really emphasizes the human's role in care. And it's one thing to have co-pilot like agents that can help with some of these things. It's another thing to advertise that you have AI nurses that cost $9 an hour. I find that to be tasteless at best and just really harmful at worst. And I really hope that people don't fall for that. They're not nurses. They are questionably trained AI agents, and they may be able to perform some kind of functions, but they are certainly not human nurses. And so you can have questions about the role of the unions, or even questions about the adoption and the timeline of technology. All of that is very legitimate, but I really think that the only way we get through this, with our sort of humanity intact, is if we really emphasize the role of humans in providing care and technology as assisting and accelerating and supporting that. And so, like Brendan said, that's a question for like governance and society and culture. And, it's not a question, like, I agree, the trajectory that we're seeing, it's pretty clear if we continue to move down this path and talk about like AI nurses for $9 an hour or whatever. That is the trajectory if we keep seeing more of that. But I do think that humans should really, emphasize we need humans to provide care. And we need to do everything we can do to accelerate that, make them the most productive, give them the most time actually providing that care. And so I hope that that's the role of anybody serious in AI and healthcare. But I unfortunately have seen a lot of this sort of like, here's your AI doctor, here's your AI nurse. And I don't agree with that fundamentally. But I agree that Brendan is right that we appear to be on that trajectory.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing you say is that humans should take care of humans, and that there is a class of drudgery that should be replaced, but the end result would not necessarily be an RN agent. It would be something short of that, but that humans should be taking care of humans, and perhaps
robotics too, I should say. Also, I mean, we're talking about AI agents, but robotics, I think, and this is a whole area I'm even less qualified to opine on, will be a really important part as well of delivering care. Sure. Because one of the areas when you're talking about bedside nursing is lifting and moving people, right, and all kinds of things that require and can really, really seriously hurt people. So there's probably a huge role there as well that will continue to expand, and I hope it does. Yeah.
And I before Brendan weighs in, and Bobby, I will just say that, one of the most sobering studies that I read, and as a former primary care physician, was that AI chatbots were more empathetic than physicians were for responding to patient questions. And at some level, we do have to ask ourselves the question: is status quo where we want to be, or are there incremental improvements or even radical improvements that we can do with AI? But humans taking care of humans, there's been enough studies done that laying hands, the concept of humans taking care of humans, is therapeutic. So right now, if I were to put my chips down, I would say that let's make sure we still have a human-to-human connection, but that there is a lot of drudgery that we need to knock away at. Brendan, any response to Lisa's points, and then we'll go to Bobby.
I just want to, like, there's agreement on the point of some of the current agents on market. My belief that agents will have a significant role is distinct that the current companies that are out there and their clumsy way of marketing is the future. I don't even think it's just clumsy. I think it is objectively wrong to say this is a nurse. To your point, Lisa, it is something that will do a lot of the tasks that we associate with nursing today, thus transforming us and allowing nurses to do significantly higher leverage tasks. That is the takeaway, that these autonomous agents, it's not that it's replacing, it will just dramatically change the shape of our roles in a way that I think we should be excited for, because we get to do cool, high leverage things. And that is my optimism, is that the roles are not replacing. Deep research will be doing cool stuff that McKinsey consultants can do significantly higher leverage things than make a bunch of like the reports. They can go and do the next level of things. Developers can focus on like the like not the infrastructural pieces, but like the cool pieces. Like I think that's the optimism, is when you have infinite bodies that can go service areas that have no nurses today, or do tasks that nurses don't want to do today, then you get the chance to work on the best and most interesting things and move up the scale of enlightenment, or whatever the pyramid is.
So Brendan, are you offering to be a voice to those marketing companies to make sure that they're stating the problem statement correctly and their approach? Because
value proposition refinement is a service that HD Health offers.
I just keep coming back to your comment about corporations are greedy, and how much of this is really not just about their marketing message, but really that's where the money's at, and therefore messaging is going to get ahead. But we'll find out. Bobby, any thoughts on this? I have one other topic I want to cover before we all run out. So
I'll keep it brief. I mean, I think like I tend to take a pretty practical look at this. I mean, today we have a shortage of nurses, right? So like let's be clear on where we are. At the conference, we heard about hospitals talking about shortages of radiologists, which is what people thought there was going to be the first, replacement of clinicians with AI. So I think immediate term, this is mostly hype. As we look a little bit far down, I think I'm probably more measured than Brendan's pure techno optimism. I think of it as like a spectrum of activities and responsibilities, right? And how does AI kind of work its way up that spectrum? I think some of those nurses and other folks would be happy to have off of their plate, right? I think at some point, is it likely that AI is going to be better at diagnosis and some of these really high value things that people consider the core of their job? Like, yeah, I think it probably is, like, realistically. And that's where I think, like, devil is in the details. Will there be something that is a better and higher use of people's time and energy at that point, to Brendan's, optimism? Yeah, hopefully. But I think that's where the real devil is in the details of how this actually plays out. So we'll see.
Well, this wouldn't be the first time that hype got put in front of tangible use cases that society will accept in a reasonable way. So hopefully we'll watch it unfold in a way that we can all align towards. I do want to shift gears and talk about one final topic, and maybe we do this in a very quick round robin way. But, recent news, again, our goal is to cover recent news here. 23andMe filed for bankruptcy. I will tell you, I was one of their customers, fascinated by the whole ancestry work, trying to figure out whether I was really 100% Indian or not. I was, just in case anyone was wondering. But this whole concept of genetic data, and when 23andMe filed for bankruptcy, it raised a lot of questions around what was the potential goal of the acquirers that might come in, and what would they do with the genetic and personal data. It's not just the genetic data, but all the questions that were being asked of customers and so on for 15 million individuals. Now, California Attorney General Rob Bonta on Friday advised 23andMe customers to go ahead and take advantage of the state privacy laws and ask the company to delete all their genetic material from their databases. Now, we've talked about these data privacy issues, I think, on our very first podcast as a group. And the data privacy issues in the context of AI, they're going to keep coming up. But can you share what happened with 23andMe in terms of this, and how can we really protect consumers from potential abuse of data? And maybe you can broaden the lens to any company that might be holding on to consumer data. And whoever wants to go first, take a stab at it, but I'd love to get opinions on all of you before we wrap up. Maybe we start with Lisa this time.
Sure, I can start. So, there are laws in the books to prevent discrimination based on genetic data. At the same time, because of the provisions of bankruptcy filing, genetic data, it can absolutely be sold and transferred as part of resolution of 23andMe's debts. I will say something that was a little bit missed, I think, in the comment and sort of the comments from Ann Wojcicki, the now former CEO and founder of 23andMe. She has made 2 unsuccessful bids for the company to take the company private. And in her commentary about the decision and the announcement, she said, I believe I'll be in a better position as an independent director to take the company private by not being the CEO. So I think she probably is not done trying to kind of regain the company and move it into whatever the next phase is, which I hope will be good for the privacy of people's data. I know that she really cares a lot about the research aspect of this and cares a lot about the community that they created. So fingers crossed on that front. At the same time, this is a huge risk for people. I also am one of the 15 million customers of 23andMe, and I am also learned that I'm definitely not adopted, right? Definitely related. You can see all my siblings and my family. We're related. So it was helpful. I found it interesting, but didn't go much further from there. And I would just say, I would still argue that the US needs a comprehensive data privacy and protection law. I don't know that that's any more likely to happen today than it was a few months ago, but I think that's the best chance we would have to minimize risk here. In lieu of that, I really think that we need very specific mechanisms for patients and consumers to provide targeted and specific consent for different uses. Again, I don't have a lot of hope for big updates to our privacy and data protection laws here in the US.
Interesting. So now we all agree that 23andMe is a consumer company that doesn't necessarily have to follow the same rules as a healthcare provider organization might. Okay, perfect.
With the asterisk that they bought a telemedicine company, which they didn't fully integrate, and so I don't know what other. I don't believe that the things that I agreed to as a consumer carried over to their telemedicine company they bought many years later. But I think just an asterisk that they've been trying to move into different areas. They claim that over 80% of their consumers, their customers, consented to their data being used for research, which I believe because I think it was a really interesting aspect of it. But again, I think as a consumer company, and that's probably part of the reason why it had the fate that it had.
Yeah, interesting.
They didn't bill insurance, right? They bill insurance. They're a lab. They're a covered entity. The fact that they're charging me directly is the problem. I think the interesting thread beyond that of like, oh, that's a gap, right? Like, why would one lab be covered under HIPAA and not the other? And that goes to Lisa's comprehensive privacy law. I think the other thing that just strikes me is like the competitors that have been successful, like Ancestry.com, figured out how to have recurring SaaS revenue on the basis of this one-off test that you really just do once. And so I take away for every single thing. Somebody who just wants to be direct consumer or do something in healthcare is figure out recurring revenue and the retention of customers, because something that is cool and flashy and hot in the pan, if it's hardware or whatever, you see this time and time again with Peloton or whatever, where it's a single purchase, and then you have to make sure that you have those subscription revenues coming in, or you're not going to be viable once the excitement wears off.
Bobby, any thoughts?
No deep thoughts here. Won't say this is my area of expertise either. I am just curious what all this publicizing, going in and deleting your data does to the actual residual value of 23andMe. So for the folks who are coming into the bid, what are they actually bidding on if a significant proportion of their previous customers have gone in and terminated their data? But no, beyond that, nothing.
No, I think
the negative view is that they just did like set data visibility equals 0 versus like, was it really deleted?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I think it does raise an interesting question for maybe a subsequent podcast on what are the residual rights when there's change of control. You may agree for company A to do something with your data, but then company B comes along and acquires the company, and it's not clear. The terms and conditions, most consumers don't read every single line of those T's and C's. And so it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening here and whether people really do delete their data. And if they don't, what are the downstream implications? Well, this has been a lot of fun covering some very important topics. We'll wrap up here. Thank you all for joining us on this great conversation.